Right, right.
So, you
It,
know,
it all depends on the situation where you are and where you're going to be. And
yeah, basically each project is run by a project manager, and that project manager can select amongst all the volunteers any team he wants, and he can pay them by those levels any way he wants based on the budget of his project.
okay,
And so, therefore, some projects, if it's working for the Boy Scouts and the Keys, it's always going to be a volunteer,
right,
come out and help us.
right,
And if it's somewhere, we find more that the projects like when we're protecting a beach from erosion or protecting a building from erosion, very often there's value there and the clients are willing to pay a lot of money and we can afford to pay our volunteers.
right, right.
And we kind of also look at a volunteer's history over time with us. If they have had to do a really tough project for no money, maybe we'll try to get them on that Caribbean project the next time as first priority. So, and we also look at people's skill sets. We try to put people on, especially people that look like they're going to be committed long term to the foundation. We put on different tracks that will get them the experience they need. So if someone's never worked in mangroves but they're really good at building, we'll try to get them that mangrove experience just so they're well rounded.
Right.
And, it's hard to, for example, deploy a reef ball if you haven't built one before, because when you build one, you start to understand how to handle it.
Right.
Certainly don't want to be learning how to handle a ball underwater for the first time.
Of course. Yeah.
A lot of these skills build on each other.
Right.
And, even in the coral planting, as you know from aquarium work, you can actually get up to level 5 now on each individual species of corals that you're working with. So you can become a level 5 Acropora expert or a staghorn or elkhorn coral specialist for some of the more difficult corals. And yet you might get level 3 in one trip on, how to plant algae and sponges and things that are much easier.
Okay.
So, and the rule is basically we don't want anybody ever putting anything at risk. So people always can just go up to the level that they've been trained and feel comfortable doing it. That's why we always like to have at least one expert.
Right.
Each team to supervise and make sure that the volunteers don't make any mistakes or harm anything.
Okay.
After all, our whole goal here is to create habitat, not destroy it.
Exactly, exactly. Now, how many, if on average per year, how many projects do you guys work on?
That's highly variable.
Right.
Because some projects are very small, and it starts to get into how do you count them. If you 3 reef balls for Boy Scouts in a weekend versus you're sending teams and teams and teams back to Antigua every week for a year, are they both one project, or is, every time you send a team it's a different project? But typically I would say on average there's usually a project going on any time of the year somewhere in the world.
Right.
There's a lot of projects that are ongoing, continuous. You go up to the Chesapeake Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation is building reef balls virtually every day, and they've got a set of molds. They move around from school to school when it comes to that school. Discrete projects have dropped off in the last 2 years with the economy. A lot of the tourist-related projects, just because the hotels have been hit so hard with tourism being down.
Right.
And economy being down. So there's been a few less of those more what I call the exotic choice vacations. For example, we've got one coming up to Peru, which is going to be fairly soon. It depends all on weather. It's one of those got to be scrambled at the last minutes because it's wintertime down there and they have big swells and they can only predict it to be calm about 5 days in advance. So we'll scramble a team at the last minute.
Right.
We've got ongoing stuff down in Sarasota, Florida, because they have the Eternal Reefs program down there and a lot of inshore bay projects going on. Basically, in the summertime, you'll see a lot more activity in the construction side because there's better weather and concrete needs warm temperatures to cure quickly. In the fall, you'll see a lot of coral planting type projects because the corals do best if planted around November, so they can get a whole 6 months of growth without a lot of algae on them during the wintertime.
Right. Right.
And then we'll see a different shift, obviously, south of the equator versus north of the equator. They got different seasons there, so stuff going on in Australia tends to be counter-cyclical to stuff that's going on here.
Okay.
All depends on travel. And there was a big surge in mangrove planting projects for a while, but that has kind of petered off lately. Again, it's kind of because it's tied typically to development properties and mitigation, things like that.
Right. Right.
Of course, we expect to see a surge in stuff around the Gulf from the Gulf oil spill, but a lot of that is just really taking time to get through all the politics and get the money out to the nonprofits to actually get stuff done.
Oh, definitely.
That's planned, not of an emergency nature.
Right, right. Now let's get into sort of the cause of why reef balls are necessary and the demand for reef balls. I'm thinking of what's causing the decay of a lot of reefs or the destruction of a lot of reefs. Can you briefly go into some of the things that you've seen personally, especially in the last 20 years or so?
Yeah, I can tell you very, very specifically what's causing the damage to our reefs, and then we can get in very generally, and then we get into specifics. But
right.
The article I think I've ever read, and I can't remember what year it was written, it was in Mother Earth magazine. I don't know if you've ever read that magazine, but they said the tagline was, "We know what's causing the reefs to die." ...
Right.
And you open up the magazine, and they had a clear plastic overlay on a global map of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And the map of the world had basically where all the reefs are threatened, and they were coded as either a threatened reef, destroyed reef, or completely healthy reef.
Mm-hmm.
The other one overlaid population, and wherever you saw humans, you saw reefs that were being destroyed and threatened, and wherever you saw relatively few humans, you saw very healthy reefs.
Right.
And so basically what it boils down to is reef systems are used to basically no change. I mean, if you look at a saltwater aquarist, his best case scenario is that everything is stable.
Right.
All its chemistry is the same, temperature is the same, all the lights are on a basic pattern and they don't change. That's what makes a good reef, because they're very delicate, well-adapted ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you throw any change into it, the reefs are just not designed to ecologically evolve as fast as other environments that are more used to changing, so it causes destruction. And what do humans cause more than anything else we do is change.
Right.
And now we can talk about some of the specific changes we've seen. I mean, now you're getting even into global changes with things like global warming, which is no longer going to let that population overlay be exactly correct.
Right.
Because you've got humans everywhere. But what do we change? We change the seashore itself by hardening the shore and changing the flows of water, changing the chemistry where fresh water flows. We create fertilizer runoff, we create sewage and septic runoffs, we create chemical changes going in the water, physical changes, we build pipelines, we drill for oil, we take our boats out and drop our anchors over the side. If you just think about trying to keep a reef from changing, it's really hard to imagine creating an environment where things aren't happening as fast.
Right.
And then there's other kind of changes that we make, like, how does a reef adapt to a plastic bag that's floating around, gets tangled around a coral, smothers it, because remember, they're animals, they have to breathe as well as get sunlight and water, and then that plastic bag floats off for the next storm and wraps the next coral and kills it, and so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, put that on top of the fact that we need resources out of the ocean, so we harvest fish. So, for thousands of years we've been fishing, and it's been relatively sustainable because there weren't that many humans. But as our population not only gets greater and needs more fish, we've also developed technologies so that we can find those fish better, and other technologies so we can get those fish better. And unfortunately, a lot of the practices that we use to take fish still today involve destroying the habitat from which the fish come from. And there I'm talking about things like net dragging and dynamite fishing, which still goes on today.
Right.
There's a lot of practices that when you drag these huge nets across the bottom, you're just destroying the habitat as you go.
Right.
And so if you multiply that by just about any change you see happening, something as simple as pumping a beach full of sand, you'd think, oh, well, it's not doing any damage, but you just create this big turbulent cloud that goes out and blocks the sunlight from all the reefs in the area. Maybe it's only once, maybe it's only for a couple of months, but that's one more change that pushes that coral or that marine animal a little bit further to the edge of what it can tolerate.
Right.
And as you know, on a tank, you can get these tank crashing syndromes where, one thing happens and it cascades. It kills that animal, which happened to be the one who ate the algae, which happened to be the one that fed the other fish, so it died, and so forth and so on. And we're seeing that certainly in places, like even the Florida Keys. When I first started diving there, a pretty amazing reef system. And now when you go back, it really looks more like a subtropical system.
Right.
There's not that many corals, and the diversity's dropped quite a bit.
And that's interesting too, because part of the Florida Keys, or a good portion of it, is protected. Now, do you see a difference between the protected part and the non-protected part?
Well, I think protection is always a good thing for reefs.
Right.
How you come out with that protection, and whether it is enforced well, whether the rules are in place that actually do protect it. It's kind of like trying to protect the reefs from humans themselves. So as long as you've got humans around there, any form of protection is better, but there are limitations. You can't just say because it's protected, it's not going to go away. I've watched that reef be destroyed slowly, even under strong governmental protection. And so there's no guarantees that's always going to solve the problem.
Right. So usually a protected area is usually restricts fishing and say in certain areas diving or any kind of human contact. What else is affecting these reefs? Is it general temperature, nutrients, like input into the water, or a combination of all?
Well, that's where it gets back to very specific reef systems, and that's why when we do a project, we look very specifically at the particular reef we're talking about and try to determine the impacts on that particular reef. It could be as local as a point source of pollution, like somebody's septic tank is broken,
right,
and that it's leaking into that particular area.
Mm-hmm.
It could be one thing like water management. Maybe somebody has changed the canal system, and now fresh water is flowing over the reef and changing the salinity of the area and what live there. It can be a natural variation that we can't even see as humans, like a hurricane cycle or an El Nino, La Nina, those kind of things. There can be things like global warming, but it's very difficult to say that particular reef is being affected particularly by global warming, although we might be able to say, like, for example, in the Florida Keys, last year we had a mass kill of many of the shallow water corals on the inside of Hawks Reef because of a very, very unusual cold water snap. Now, was that caused by global warming? Probably, but you can't say that for sure.
Right.
And that type of event might happen on average every 5,000 years, and we might have just happened to be there when it happened. No amount of protection is going to stop, those cycles from occurring.
Right.
But I think in South Florida in particular, if you want to talk about that, it's water management. They're working on the Everglades and how all that water is handled. But, you certainly have a fairly large population of people down in the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area. And there's a lot of, many, many massive changes since the 50s, everything from the drying up of the Everglades swamps to, all the construction that was done in the Keys in the early 80s.
Right.
A lot of changes there. They permitted a lot of septic tanks, not sewage systems. And stuff going on the West Coast affects it as well. Stuff in the Gulf, pollution that comes down through. And also you got to remember that at least in the Florida Keys area and all the way up to Broward County, really, you've got a coral reef that is already at the northern fringe of what it can handle. So anytime a coral reef is near the edge of its habitat boundaries, it's going to be more vulnerable to being changed than if it's in the center, if that makes any sense. So you think about it like a plant. If I've got a palm tree and I plant it in South Florida, it's going to do fine. But if I take that coconut palm and move it up to Central Florida, the first time it freezes, it'll die. It might live fine for 10, 20 years. It might not. It might die the first year from freezing.
Right.
And thereby, or maybe just gets cold enough to where it's more susceptible to a disease this year, or and the bugs get it, that kind of thing. And so, when you're talking about Florida, you are talking about a fringe situation. So they are going to show change quicker.